Hello and welcome to my workshop. So we're going to be getting back on the LS male Jeep crawler. We've got a lot done with this. The body is pretty much there. The chassis is set up and ready to go for the body. And now we have to get all the details, the interior and such, and get this thing finished up. Alright, so let's get started. Okay, so the first thing I need to do here is mount the roll cage. So in the front, I'm able to use just an M3 screw threaded right up into the bottom of the roll cage. In the back, it sits behind where I was able to put the floor. So what I'm doing here is just taking a little piece of brass and making an extension so I could bolt the brass to the floor and then bolt the roll cage up to the brass. As tight, as snug as this roll cage fit in there, I didn't really need much to hold it in place once it's in there. And so this really just kind of more positions it than kind of holds it in place. Because once the body is, everything is on the chassis, the roll cage really can't go anywhere. So on the body side, what I'm trying to do is use a smaller screw. So I have an M2 screw with a locking nut on the inside to go in the body. And in the back, like I said, just able to thread right up inside the roll cage. So it's a little bit tricky getting these in position, but in the end I was able to get everything lined up. And the one thing I wanted to do make sure is that they weren't exactly perfect from side to side. Nothing like this ever is. So I was able to do a mark on one side and the other just so I could identify these when I'm putting them back in place later on if they're painted. So here I'm taking and notching down a piece of tubing, and what that's going to be is the bottom portion of the dash for the roll cage. The way the Jeep was designed, the dash just bolts directly onto the roll cage. And so on the the LS male Jeep, they just went with a very simple dash. It's literally just a piece of metal stretched across with the gauges and stuff mounted in there. So basically I'm just taking the same thing with styrene. So many of these parts I ended up designing in Fusion and send them off to 3D printed for shapeways. And so I'm taking those pieces, using some store-bought pieces like the seats, and I'm trying to get this interior put together. So I wasn't really sure what I was going to do with the seats. The real Jeep has the seats mounted on bars that look like they're attached to the roll cage, and then the seats are like bolted to that. It was just probably a little bit much for me to try to get that done, so I thought the best thing to do was to make a box to mount the seat up on. I also thought, well, if I have that space, I might be able to use that for like a BEC or a receiver or something kind of small. I wasn't really sure, so I was thinking, well, kind of kill two birds with one stone if I can. So essentially that's what I'm doing here, is just making a little box that'll the seat will mount to, and then that'll be glued down to the base. So as I mentioned, all these 3D printed parts I designed, just getting the stuff glued in place. So it's the steering wheel to match, and this little turn signal Jeep steering column, a couple switches, knobs, and then just some round pieces I'm using for gauges. The VS410 transmission, I was a little bit bigger than the real one, and so the tunnel for the transmission tunnel is a little bit bigger than what it would be on the real Jeep, but I was able to try to make it literally as small as possible. So I'm just kind of trying to make every piece down as low and tight to the VS410 chassis as I can. And so I end up with a tunnel that I'm going to bolt in and out, and mainly just for ease of painting, getting all the parts added to that. You can see that basically you just start with getting a basic general shape, seeing if that fits, adding a piece, put that up there, see what needs to be added, and then just start adding pieces, carving it down, and some sanding, filling, and before you know it, you have your shape you need. So in order to bolt this thing down, I'm going to end up taking a thicker piece of styrene that is going to be glued to the base, and what that allowed me to do is to run screws up through and hold this thing down. There's no real stress, there's no real force on this, so just having screws straight into the styrene is plenty enough. So I tried to mix the color 2 or 3 times to get the exact color I was looking for, and then I just realized that the color right out of the jar was almost perfect. So it was painted first with the silver, and then when you put the blue on top of it, and I didn't paint it super thick, just this one thin coat, that silver almost kind of shines through and gives it that sparkle that the original Jeep steering wheel kind of has. So here's this little emergency switch, little red handle, and a fire extinguisher is going to mount in there, and a couple of little odds and ends to kind of round out the interior. So with the shifter and I think they're hydraulic brakes, and cutting brakes, I'm not really sure exactly what they are. I didn't want to paint them just black, so I painted it black, and then I painted satin, and then I mixed a little bit of gold in just to kind of give it a little bit of an interest. And so you can do that to kind of give your pieces that a little more visual interest with having different tones and just a little bit different shades, even though they're all technically kind of just black. So these little rings are actually ones that I had designed to hold the tiny axial light lenses. They were maybe just a tad too big, but they're almost perfect. So I thought, this would work really great. So I ended up just taking those and using those as bezels for gauges. And so ignition switch, a little switch of some sort to do something, pull knob, and then the turn signal indicators. So to give the look that the piece is bolted in like the real one, I ended up just adding in some fake hardware to that, painting that silver, and then as you can see I just glued those 2 bars that I put in earlier. So the back is going to be where the battery is stored. I wasn't sure how big of a battery I was going to be able to get in here, and I ended up getting a pretty decent size one for the amount of space they have, and having pretty much a full interior. So essentially what I'm trying to do is make a box that fits in between the rails, and I'm going to use that box to almost hold the rails in position so I can take out some of the bracing that come factory on the VS410. So in order to get the box in the right position, instead of having to squeeze it down over time and time again, what I ended up doing is just taking some zip ties and literally just zip tying the chassis all the way down as far as it would go. And so I know that if it's in that position, then I can put a box in, and I could just rest it on any part that it would come in contact with, like the top of the axle there. When I do cut those zip ties and the thing cycles back up, I know that's not going to hit anything. So once you get the basic box shape done, then it's the dance of putting the body on and off, because not only does it have to clear around the chassis here and the body, but also has to fit up to the roll cage in a certain way. I want it to be as snug up to the roll cage as possible. The LS Mail Jeep has a cover in the back that covers up the cargo area, and I'm going to be using that as an access point for the battery tray, you'll see later. If you can see on the side, I have some thicker styrene, and that's the part that goes in between the rails and where the screws will go directly into. And that's, once this thing is together, that styrene box is strong enough to keep that chassis from racking and distorting. It'll be just as good as the brace that come from the factory. So the box serves more than one purpose. It's going to be holding the battery, going to cover up some of the back of the interior and kind of simulate the floor and the cargo area, but it also keeps you from looking directly through the chassis underneath the body and gives it that inner fender well look. So these little wings I'm putting on, they're basically going to be just block off the view going backwards when you're looking in from the interior. Most of that's going to be covered up with a seat. It's going to be all painted black, so it can be really hard to see. I wanted to cover it up as much as possible. You can't really get it to go directly up to the body because it has to clearance around the roll cage, which is attached to the body. But if you get it pretty close, you really can't see in there too bad, and I think it worked out really well. So the finished piece there, and just a couple little minor tweaks to get that body to drop down on there. This turned out to be a pretty nice piece. It took quite a bit of time and effort to get it, but I think it's really nice in the end. Now the front, I was planning on putting the electronics in, and I thought I was going to end up having to put like some of the electronics in the battery box, some of them underneath the seat like I talked about. But what I ended up doing is just taking this piece of aluminum, making a couple little standoffs and mounts to mount it to the transmission, basically right in front of the firewall. All of the electronics he had fit directly on it. It was perfect. The other nice thing about it is that with all the electronics in one central area, I can shorten up all the wires, and there's less mess. Things just doesn't have to go as far of a distance. Pretty much the only thing that runs any distance away from that is the battery connection, which goes to the back obviously, and then to the motor, and that's not that far. It's actually pretty close. So it was kind of a perfect spot for this. I'm a really big fan of soldering these good connections on there, but having things so that it's modular, you can pull it out. Because if you have a problem with it, it's just so much quicker and easier to pull that part out, swap a new one in. And if you're consistent with how you're setting up your speed controllers and all your components, then you can take one from another vehicle. If they're all the connections are going to be the same, it's very easy to kind of troubleshoot and diagnose things. Another trick I like to do is to shorten up your wires coming from your servo and kind of your JST plugs and all your servo wires. If you can buy the crimps and the ends, separate, and there's a crimping tool, and so you just cut it directly to the length you need and crimp on a new end, and you can avoid all these ridiculous adapters and zip tying up 6, 8, 12 inches of wire that you don't need. It just makes it a lot cleaner and just looks a lot better. So I'm starting on a power wire to go to the main, from the main power wire to some of the accessory stuff in the front. And in order to get the thing to kind of hold in place, I basically put the wire, wrapped it around, and then zip tied the wire to the other so it would just hold it in place so I can get it soldered. And once it's soldered, it's generally pretty good. You can, even if you heat the solder back up, it's not going to just fall apart. This is probably one of the most fun parts for me, is the wiring at the end. I really enjoy it. It's almost meditative to sit there and just get all these things put together. Been a while since I put a Dean's plug on. I've gotten so used to the XT60s and XT90s. They still work. I don't think they're as good as the XT60s, but yeah, the Deans work just fine. So there's a vent on the side of this Jeep, and I think it's a fresh air intake vent for the cab. I'm not really sure. Essentially, I'm just kind of recreating that. So what I got was a screen repair kit. So it just has little pieces of window screen, and I've made a styrene piece, glued that window screen in, and then made a kind of a bezel going around that with 2 bars across it, and it emulates that vent that's on the real Jeep. So just marking out the corners with the drill bit, and then coming back and drilling the hole out, and then you can just basically take a razor knife and cut between the 2 holes. You get it pretty close. There's going to be some jaggedy edges where it's not perfect, but just a few seconds with the Dremel tool, and it cleans up really nice. Here, just installing that grill, so I basically cut a hole, drilling the majority of the material out with the drill bit, just taking a Dremel bit to kind of sneak up to that line. So this is a cover for the windshield wiper motor. So on this particular DJ5 mail truck, the windshield wiper motor sits on the outside of the truck. So I don't believe there's an actual windshield wiper motor in the real one because, well, there's no windshield wiper. But I think he just kept that cover for the looks of it. So that's basically, I'm just taking some expanded PVC, gluing that together, and then sanding that down to the right shape, and then I'll just glue that on. So this is going to be the cover for the battery tray. Like I said, the real LS Mail Jeep has this metal cover that goes over the cargo area, and he has, a logo cut out into that. He sent me that logo, and I put it into the Cricut machine and made several cuts on styrene. And what I'm doing is basically cutting that out, gluing those back together to make a thicker piece of styrene, because the Cricut machine only cut 15 to 20 thousandths thick. I really wanted it to be around, at least 60 thousandths. So essentially, I just, do it 3 times, glue them all together, and I ended up with this cover. As you see, I have my old man spectacles out, the magnifying glasses. I just have to use those when I'm painting. I just can't see as well as I used to, I guess. So it has a nice little light on it, and it really does show the detail. And what's nice about that is that I found that if you can get it to a level that looks pretty good under magnification, there's absolutely no way you'll see it in real life. I was able to get on the Cricut machine these vinyl letters cut, and so LS Mail, we're going to send it. I was able to put on there along with the tire pressure. They're here just bolting in the interior pieces, getting this thing finalized here. I do have it where you can take the seats out. You can't take this thing back apart. I have no reason to. I probably won't, but it is made so you can pull the roll cage back out if you need to. You can take it all to pieces. So I really had a good time building this thing. I think it turned out great. I'm super excited to get it to the customer. I can't wait to see this thing driving on the rocks. A lot of absolutely fun stuff coming up. Until then, we'll see you on the rocks.
Yeah.